Congressman Ami Bera, thank you so much for joining in on CNN News 18. Let's begin with the big breakthrough, which is the reduction of a whopping 50% tariff being brought down to 18%. What are your thoughts, and how do you see the challenges ahead now, given that they have arrived upon this agreement, but the deal is yet to be hammered out?
I think this is a real positive step. When I was in India in September, all we talked about was the 50% tariffs. So we're in a much better place today. I saw Prime Minister Modi's comments yesterday, President Trump's comments. And yes, there's still a lot to be worked out in the details of this deal, but it's a much better place for the two biggest democracies in the world to be.
So there's a lot of concern over here that even though India has given that assurance that it will stop buying Russian crude oil, will the United States and Venezuela, especially with its completely dilapidated oil market at the moment, be able to meet the kind of needs that India being the largest democracy currently has, with a 1.4 billion people's population?
I don't think India is going to be able to just turn off its dependence on Russian oil. But if you start to see movement where they're reducing their reliance on imports of Russian oil and finding new markets like Venezuela and elsewhere where they're able to meet their energy needs, that's a positive step in the right direction. That helps stabilize Venezuela. That'll take time, as you already pointed out. The infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. But again, if that goes in that direction, that's a positive. And there's still a lot more to work on, critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, supply chains. Indian companies are making massive investments in the United States. U.S. companies now will start making those investments in India. And again, I think this is a positive first step.
So the United States, under the current Trump administration, has maintained that the way to strategic cooperation is via economic cooperation. Henceforth, India will also be now joining the Pax Silica. On that note, how do you see things moving forward, especially, say, when it comes to the sector of critical minerals? Dr. Jaishankar is very much in Washington. He'll be attending that critical minerals ministerial at the State Department. What can one expect, especially with the United States and India joining hands in countering China's dominance when it comes to rare earth minerals and securing supply chains?
So I think this is a huge opportunity for India. As we start to open up mining, we start to produce supplies of these critical minerals, these rare earth elements. We're still very beholden on the refining capacity of China. I do think if the United States, Japan, other countries come together, this is a potential area where India can build out a brand new industry, perhaps in the refining sector. Again, we've introduced legislation, bipartisan, the Dominance Act, to use the critical mineral partnership here in the United States to work with countries like India and elsewhere to develop the refining capacity.
Do you think India's increasing footprint in the number of FTAs it has forged, especially in the year gone by, and the most recent being the one with EU, where India's opened the floodgates, say, to a 27-member trading bloc, has that given India a kind of leverage and changed the way Washington is looking at trade with New Delhi?
Sure. I mean, I think this does give India some leverage. It opens up India's export markets, but also what I noticed when I was in India in September is just the growth of their own domestic market. So they're not just reliant on exports. You have a rising middle class that is increasingly consuming Indian products. So, again, I think these trade deals are good for India. They're good for the United States. They reduce those tariff barriers. And we've been trying in my 14 years to get a trade deal. It's always been elusive with India. And hopefully this is a good first step.
At a time, Donald Trump's MAGA base has really, been drawing the lines in the sand. What is the role that the Indian American diaspora, such as you as well, have played in bringing Washington and New Delhi on the same page?
Look, we've seen some of the attacks from the MAGA base on the Indian American diaspora, myself personally included, some of the attacks online. That said, the diaspora has started to step up, has started to galvanize around wanting a strong U.S.-India relationship. We saw some of the comments that said it was time for the diaspora to step up and be more actively engaged. I I think you're starting to see the diaspora say, hey, wait a minute, this is a critical partnership. We still have things that we need to work on. There's the issue of H-1Bs and $100,000 fees. Yeah, I hope that's the next thing we can work with the Trump administration to resolve.
Glad you brought that up. And that's why I want to ask you, there's now focus also going back on what happens to Quad. So far, it's been lying dormant. India was all set to play host to the Quad summit. Can we expect a renewed focus coming from Washington when it comes to security in the Indo-Pacific?
It's still my hope that India hosts the Quad Leaders Summit, that President Trump attends in India. Now that you have the contours of a trade deal, I think this would be the perfect time for the president and Prime Minister Modi to resume what historically has been a very positive relationship and start talking about that again with Australia, with Japan. Critical minerals would be an area that's of concern to all of the countries. Building out the pharmaceutical capacity, the supply chains, looking at AI, looking at things that we could do together. And then I would toss in, again, we still have to resolve the H-1B issue.
Congressman, my last question. How do you see India being placed on the tariff order, especially in terms of South Asian and Southeast Asian economies? We are lower on the entire ladder, say, compared to Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, even China. Most of these countries, say, including Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, India has been competing with in terms as a manufacturing hub. Does that also indicate Washington's faith and trust in the Indian economy?
Yeah, from the Washington, D.C. perspective, Congress's perspective, for 3 decades, we've been focused on the U.S.-India relationship, going back to President Clinton, through President Bush, Obama, and President Trump's first term to President Biden. So I'm glad to see this trajectory. We recognize that how big the Indian markets are, how fast the economy is growing. So compared to the other nations in the region, India does take some primacy here.
All right. Thank you so much, Congressman Bera, for joining. It was a pleasure having you here on CNN News 18. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Be well.
Bye-bye.